The NFL officially back, Chris, celebrating 100 years, although leave it to a guy who wears 84 to steal the spotlight.
And it appears as though Antonio Brown is going to be playing this many plays this week. ESPN reporting that the Raiders plan on suspending Antonio Brown. Now, the report does not indicate how many games, how long, or who knows. As Jamie Eisenberg mentioned just moments ago, maybe it's just for a half. Maybe things get together, cooler heads prevail. They all get in the cryogenic chamber and cool off a bit. But the word right now is that the Raiders plan on suspending Antonio Brown, reportedly over AB's Instagram post from yesterday that criticized the team for a $54,000 fine. Now we bring in one of AB's former teammates, our Bryant McFadden, a two-time Super Bowl champion in Pittsburgh. Brian, I just want to hear your reaction to this whole mess right now.
Man, I'm shocked. I really thought we were past the drama with AB. We were past the distractions with AB. This is opening week. You know, guys are getting prepared for this upcoming season. We have a big game tonight. And then once again, you know, he steals the headline. This has been a reoccurring situation with AB. And I know, Chris, you were talking about, you know, the length of the suspension. Some people feel like it could potentially be a series or two. Some folks feel like it could be a half. I wouldn't be surprised to see AB not take one snap, not receive one snap in this weekend's ball game. And here's why. You clearly made team information public information. And then you get into a heated, I guess, verbal confrontation with the GM Mike Mayock that you had to be held back by your teammates. So clearly the verbal dispute was kind of on the verge to becoming physical based on what I'm hearing, that teammates had to hold him back. That's disrespectful. You were already disrespectful in, you know, making team information public. But then it's disrespectful for you to have a back and forth with the GM of the organization who brought you to town, gave you a nice contract for doing something they're supposed to do. If you miss practices, if you get fined, guess what? You potentially will be, if you miss meetings, you potentially will be fined. So how can you feel some type of way for a team doing something that they're supposed to do, and then you go out and make it known to the public, and then you want to have a verbal dispute with the GM? So because of that disrespect from two different angles, I wouldn't be surprised to see AB to not see AB play this weekend.
B-Mac, we showed a list of events with Antonio Brown and the team. I mean, it reads like a CVS receipt. I mean, it just gets really long. GM Mike Mayock's first time front office role, but John Gruden's been there before. What do you think about the whole buyer beware? I mean, you had to have known that the Raiders knew what they were getting in Antonio Brown, maybe not expecting this, obviously, but boy, they thought that maybe they could control him, and it just hasn't worked out, at least to this point.
Well, you know, I think they felt like everybody is entitled to second chances, even though the news following AB coming from Pittsburgh was not all good, but we know there's two sides to every story. And also, too, the Raiders felt like, you know, he's worth the risk. I mean, when it comes to production, when it comes to being consistent, you don't question anything football related with AB. But it's his off-the-field antics, his actions, how he handles himself that has really made him very, very difficult to deal with. So now I think they feel like enough is enough, because one thing I can say about the Oakland Raiders, their staff, the entire organization, they have supported AB with the issues to his feet, with the helmet issue. They have really supported him. They treated him like their own. And now for you to really just go above and beyond what you're called to do as far as unwanted attention, enough is enough. So I know Mike Mayock, he's tired of his shenanigans. The same can be said for John Gruden. You know how dialed in John Gruden is. Just not. Thursday, you're supposed to be talking about the upcoming opponent. And now look what they're talking about there in the facility, the Antonio Brown potential suspension. I mean, enough is enough. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see AB not play one down. And I also would not be surprised to see AB not play the entire season in Oakland.
Amazing. And again, the news coming from an ESPN report that the Raiders plan on suspending Antonio Brown is Will Brinson joins us now. And the suspension and the argument between Antonio Brown and Mike Mayock, the general manager, reportedly stemming from a post yesterday from Antonio Brown, Will, where he kind of called out the Raiders for getting a $54,000 fine. And it sounds like there's a chance that the Raiders could get back millions and millions and millions of dollars for Antonio Brown if it keeps heading down this track.
It's actually crazier than that, Chris. The Raiders, with what has happened with Antonio Brown, and look, I mean, like I'm prone to hyperbole, but I feel very safe in saying that this has exceeded anything that even Terrell Owens did in his illustrious career of insanity, with respect to how he approached the people in the front office at the various teams he played for. Antonio Brown, I mean, this is a freebie. This is a get-out-of-jail-free card for the Raiders on a trade that they obviously regret. And if they want to right now, they can suspend him 4 games for conduct detrimental to the team based on language in the collective bargaining agreement. They can then go after and void Antonio Brown, the guarantees in Antonio Brown's contract. That could get up to $29 million. I guess they could go after his $1 million signing bonus if they want, but probably won't. And then they could actually release him. And if you listen to the guy at SpotTrack.com noted that it would be 0 dead money against the cap. So this is the Raiders. They made a mistake. It could potentially only cost them a 3rd-round pick if they were able to suspend him and void out his guarantees. Now, they'll have to deal with an arbitrator. They're going to have to go through the process of, how all this stuff works. And that you're divorcing a very crazy person is basically what would be happening here. But at the end of the day, if the Raiders can get out from under this Antonio Brown deal and get Antonio Brown out of their building and into the free agency and not actually have to pay him anything in terms of those guarantees, this is a big old win for Oakland. And I think that's exactly what they are doing. And as I noted on Twitter yesterday or the day before, when Antonio Brown posted that note, you could read in the language from Mike Mayock, it is very clear that the Raiders were setting him up. Look at this. It says, the Raiders reserve the right to impose additional remedies available under the club's discipline schedule, the CBA, and your NFL player contract, including, but not limited to, additional fines and discipline for engaging in conduct detrimental to the club. This is like getting written up at any other job, right? You're on probation when you get that conduct detrimental line. And then when you add in the fact that Antonio Brown posted it on social media, which would qualify as further conduct detrimental, and then would had to be restrained while having a conversation with Mike Mayock about the social media post. This is a slam dunk for the Raiders. And if they want to get out from under this deal and they want to kick Antonio Brown to the curb and have it not cost them a lot of money, they have a whole wide open lane to do it.
B-Mac, let me ask you this, and I asked it a little bit in terms of the buyer beware with Antonio Brown. Clearly, there were parts of this offseason and summer where you had Mike Mayock say, hey, you're either all in or you're out, despite the team saying that they were supporting AB, which we've seen so far. Then we have the letter. Now we have the altercation. As a player, if you have a problem with your front office manager, how do you approach that, and how do you assess now the relationship between both Mayock and AB?
Well, if you have an issue, that's why you have an agent. You allow your agent to do the dirty work for you. That's why they're there, outside of negotiating your contracts. This is something, if AB felt like the Raiders handled this entire fine wrong, allow Drew Rosenhaus to do what he's supposed to do. Do not take it upon yourself. So number one, put this in the social media world. And when you do that, you know the Raiders were going to be heated hearing and seeing this, because no one knew about the fine until AB made it known. I mean, they're getting ready for this upcoming ball game. No one wants to hear about a fine. And then when you put the caption like, oh, they tried you, or they came at you wrong. I mean, last time I checked, if a player misses meetings or don't show up to practices, they're going to get fined. That's just the nature of the game. I mean, I don't care. It's not even about being a player. Whatever your 9 to 5 is, if you don't show up to work and don't tell them, there's a good chance you're probably going to get fined or suspended. So, but the issue is he wants to be treated differently because he's a superstar. And in his mind, he feels like it doesn't matter what I do, I don't deserve the same punishment the other players would receive because I'm better. And he has to get away from that thinking. And as a player with me, if I was on that team with the Raiders, I mean, enough is enough. Like, yo, we know you great. We know that. We know you're one of the best in the world. But as far as your behavior away from the football field, like, man, listen, you miss practices. You haven't showed up. You don't talk to us. You don't communicate with us. You miss meetings. We know about the injury to your feet. Okay, we give you a pass. Some things happen. That's an honest accident. But the whole helmet issue, we were there. We supported you, even though we felt like you went above and beyond, making that issue bigger than what it was supposed to be. And now this, you basically trying to attack the GM for finding you because you're a player? Like, come on, enough is enough. This team, this is a much talented team than what we saw last year. I think it would be fine with or without AB. But as a player, man, come on, man. Like, yo, you don't get the picture. And we don't think you will learn. With that being said, let's move on.
Bryant McFadden is a two-time Super Bowl champion with the Steelers. He played with Antonio Brown in 2010 and 2011. We're also visiting with Will Brinson from the Pick Six podcast. Word that the Raiders are having practice this afternoon, that Antonio Brown is not at practice in Oakland, and the line in the game against the Broncos is now -2.5 in favor of Denver. B-Mac, though, I do want to have you go back about 9 years and tell me about the Antonio Brown that walked into that locker room out of Central Michigan as kind of an unheralded player that needed to prove himself, and compare that to where he is now.
Number one, a guy that loved football. We saw that instantly. We saw how talented he was and how hard he worked at the game and improving his craft. A guy that was always smiling from ear to ear. A guy that, you know, was soft-spoken with that raspy voice, but yet and still he loved the game of football. And in our locker room, I mean, we had the entire team, we had the same personality. But I think what changed with AB when he became popular, when he became a household name, and then when the money came, when his pockets got fatter, the ego got fatter, the personality changed. And when you don't discipline that early, you can create a monster. And because of that, we're seeing an individual that feels like no one should discipline him or police him. And it's a sad situation to really see before our eyes, because I think AB, as far as talent, and he's not the most talented wide receiver in the game. He's not even the most talented wide receiver in his era, but he is one of the best because he works so hard. But if he can channel that same energy away from the football field to his personality, to his ego, he would be one of the best to ever do it. But sometimes success isn't for everybody because you don't know how to handle success. And I think right now he feels like no one can tell me what to do. I'm a made man. I've made way more money than what I was supposed to. I'm comfortable, financially comfortable. I'm okay. And forget the team element. It's about me. And that's another thing, Chris, too. When he was there with us in Pittsburgh, it was all about the team. It was all about the team. Now, my personal opinion, just watching his behavior over the last few years, I think it's more so about his brand.
Speaking about the team, Will Brinson, let me ask you about the Raiders. My goodness, it seems like forever ago they won that third Super Bowl trophy. Al Davis was still.
It was forever ago,
us.
Tommy.
Yeah, it simply was. Look, this is a franchise that's been bad, but 2016 with Jack Del Rio was supposed to be good. Then he has the bad season, and in comes John Gruden. And just this whole thing with them moving to Vegas and they're on Hard Knocks. I mean, how do you look at the Raiders right now? How do you best describe them?
Dumpster fire feels fair. I don't know. I wanted to hammer the under 6.5, but the juice was -200. I wish it was 6 -120. I liked it all along, and this AB news only confirms it. I mean, look, John Gruden came into a bad situation, a situation that's sort of been propped up by luck after that big run by Derek Carr. He then trades Khalil Mack, trades Amari Cooper, and decides he wants to build the team in his image as, you know, they had this horrific season in 2018. Well, what happened was when John Gruden had a disaster season and he lost a bunch of football games, he got impatient and he decided he needed to win now and needed to win at whatever cost. And so he went out and he traded a third-round pick for Antonio Brown and made Antonio Brown and look, I'm not saying this lightly, a legitimately crazy person. They made him the highest paid wide receiver in football when he didn't even really need a new contract. They signed Trent Brown to the biggest left tackle deal in free agency and then decided they were going to move him to the right tackle spot. He has Derek Carr living in a house down the street from him, but we all know he doesn't want Derek Carr as his quarterback. He talks to Brandon Marshall. He brings him in and says, hey, we want you to be one of the leaders of our defense as we transition to Vegas, and then cuts him before the season. Like, there's no rhyme or reason. Gruden is impatient. He's a very aggressive guy. This is how he acted in Tampa Bay. And the problem is you can't go out and build a team like this, quick patch through free agency to try and get to 10 wins. This was always going to be a slow rebuild after he burnt down the original rebuild that Reggie McKenzie put together with Cooper, Mack, and Carr. And so as a result, we now have all of this unfolding. And this looks like a Raiders team to me, guys. When you look at their schedule, I think they're going to start 0-7. As Chris alluded to, that line in week 1 is from a pick to like 0-2. Look at this. I mean, tell me who they're beating. Because they're not winning. They might win one of those first 4 games. They're going to get stomped by the Bears in London, and then they got to come back and go at Green Bay and at Houston. That is the recipe for 0-7, and all of a sudden you have all these veterans quitting on you. I don't. This is what happens when a guy who wants to win now is inheriting a situation that requires a long rebuild and doesn't know how to properly apply modern franchise construction to a team that has traditionally not been very good.
Their first 8 games are brutal. They're going to be gone for a very long time. They're not going to be home for a month in October with that London game. You talked about the season over-under win total at about 6 or 6.5. Again, that line opened Raiders -3. Then it sat at a pick'em for most of the day until the AB news came. Now it's shifted all the way to Denver 2.5. I want to get both of your thoughts. B-Mac, start with you in terms of the specific game Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, I like Denver just based on the distractions the Raiders are currently dealing with now. As a player, that's tough to, put behind you because now you're like, man, listen, this is supposed to be he's supposed to be a key contributor to what we're trying to do. And now we're dealing with this. So mentally, it kind of, puts you off balance. And for the Broncos, they're applauding all of these issues the Raiders are currently having. They're loving this. And this is an opportunity for the Broncos to really start 2019 off in a good note, in a good way with a win against a divisional foe. So for me, yes, I think the Denver Broncos, they're a more stable organization right now. They don't have any distractions. I take the Broncos.
I was looking around my office for like a hammer or a lock or something that I could hold up because you want to pepper the Broncos now at -2. Hit that money line. I mean, I wish you had a pick. They're going to crush the Raiders. The Raiders have a bad defense that got some nice young players added to it, but the Broncos have Mike Munchak with a revamped offensive line and a good running game, plus Joe Flacco throwing play action down the field. More important, who on this Raiders offense is challenging that Broncos defense? Von Miller and Bradley Chubb are probably the best pass rushing combo in football. Chris Harris is back. They have an excellent secondary. Derek Carr can't throw deep. I don't think I would take the Raiders. Here's the bet that probably hadn't moved that you want to take a look at, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I would guess it's something in the range of 21 maybe because the total is probably 46. The Raiders team total, take the under. There's no way this team, without Antonio Brown at full speed, is scoring more than 20 points against what I believe will be the best defensive football in Denver in 2019.
All right. The news is that Antonio Brown is going to be suspended by the Oakland Raiders. We've got Will Brinson and a former teammate of Antonio Brown, Bryant McFadden, joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. Don't go anywhere as we hit this from all sides. Coming up next, we'll be joined by our great NFL writer, Pete Prisco, who's been around the game 30-plus years, Tommy. Not sure he's ever seen anything quite like this.
Back here, CBS Sports HQ, where we continue to follow developing news. The Raiders plan on suspending star wide receiver Antonio Brown, but it did not happen yet. Let's welcome in senior NFL writer Pete Prisco over the phone. Pete, what do you make of this latest development between the silver and black and their star wideout?
It really isn't surprising. I mean, this guy's been technically off the rails for a long time when it comes to being a teammate and a player you want in your locker room. I mean, let's face it, he quit on the Steelers a year ago. He was a problem his entire career, or at least the second half of his career in Pittsburgh, and now he's a problem in Oakland. And if I'm the Oakland Raiders, and I'm going to give Mike Mayock kudos here because he stood up to him. And he's not going to take it. He's not going to take the same stuff that the Steelers took over the last couple of years. So kudos to Mike Mayock. I want to see how this suspension plays out. If it were me, I'd get rid of him. Send him packing, get him off the team.
You say kudos to Mike Mayock. He's entering this front office role for the first time in his career. He has a head coach, John Gruden, that's just starting his 10-year contract. AB just got an extension. So there's guys getting paid. When you talk about front office fits and team fits, how do you think Mike Mayock has navigated? Of course, we know this summer he's talked about AB going all in. Are you all out? Your whole thoughts right now on that dynamic?
Well, Mike Mayock's old school. I mean, he's not going to put up with this stuff. And look, John Gruden's been one of those guys that at times has put up with these, receivers who have been divas. We've seen that over the years. But Mike Mayock's a little bit of old school. And if you're going to come after him, he's not going to stand there and just allow that to happen. He's going to do something about it. And I give him credit for that. He's building something there. I don't necessarily think that they're ready to compete this year, but they've made some good moves in the offseason. Why would you want that guy in your building, being a cancer in the locker room? If you have one and it becomes two, then you're okay. If it becomes four, you have problems. If it becomes eight, and, those leaders like that sometimes tend to spread their disease of being a malcontent in the locker room, then you got problems. So I think he's smart. If he's smart, he'll get rid of him. I'd send him packing.
Let's also welcome into the conversation our NFL insider, Jason La Canfora. JLC, what more can you tell us about what's going on with AB and the Raiders right now?
Well, look, Mike Mayock is set up to be the bad cop in this relationship. There's no doubt about that. If you watched any of Hard Knocks, you can see the different dynamic between Gruden and Antonio Brown. And Gruden's kind of trying to be that sensei and be that shrink and try to keep things light and connect with him, on a personal level. And Mayock's there to lay down the law. But let's be clear. John Gruden runs that organization every way, shape, and form. And Mike Mayock's never been through these waters before at all to any degree. And I've talked to people in the Steelers organization who are like, look, if he snapped at Mayock, if he said something like, that's what you bought. That's why you got him for a 3 and not a 1. Like, you got to pick your battles with this guy. And if you make it personal, then it might be to the detriment of your team because you may end up cutting him, suspending him, or whatever. And let's be real. The Raiders made a big part of their offseason getting this guy and doing it with the eye towards him still being there and being a big part of this offense when they moved to Vegas. So, Mike Mayock can make some rookie mistakes here as well. And I'm not defending what Antonio Brown did, but this is precisely what they bought. The Steelers were willing to put up with it for, 7, 8 years. This didn't just start happening last year because of the production. The Raiders haven't seen the production side yet, right? He's never done anything for them on a football field. And from what I'm gathering, John Gruden right now is not necessarily ready to say, yeah, this guy's not playing for me this weekend. So obviously Antonio Brown's been put on notice. There's been some threats made. How this actually plays out this weekend yet is to be determined. And as much time as we may spend talking about Mike Mayock and his interpersonal relationship with Antonio Brown, John Gruden will be making the call.
JLC, this also comes down to the financial aspect of things. And while many dollars could potentially be at stake, maybe not a lot of sense in terms of what's going on out in the East Bay. In regard to what AB is dealing with right now, if he gets suspended, misses any time, what are we looking at potentially financially?
Well, I mean, look, they could make the case that he's had a period of conduct detrimental to the team that ultimately led them to release him, and it puts his future guarantees at stake. I mean, it's really only $1 million he got up front, but he has, $30 million, $29 million more in potential guarantees that they could make the case void. Excuse me. So some of this is procedural and getting everything in order if it gets to that point. But I think they, and I talked to somebody from another organization who was just texting me about it, and he's like, if Antonio Brown called the GM a name, I don't know that the PA is just going to, let it go. Like, oh, yeah, he should be suspended. You know what I mean? Yeah, he should be suspended for a game for that. You know what I mean? If the punishment fits the crime. Now, the Raiders could also say, There's all these other things that have gone on, but again, he's already been fined for that, right? So there's a component to the NFLPA. There's a component of, people being in charge for the first time, and Antonio Brown obviously brings a lot of unique actions. He's not going to be a guy who just toes the line. He's going to do silly things, knucklehead things. He's going to be his own worst enemy at times. The question again for John Gruden ultimately is going to be, is the potential production at some point no longer worth the aggravation?
And Pete, what do you say to that?
It's not. It just simply is not. I mean, look, I'm on the negative side of him because I think when people look at it, they don't pay attention to see that yards per catch has gone down from 15 to 12. He's 31 years old. That's not a good look for a wide receiver. And then you bring all the baggage. It's just not worth it. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. Your locker room is important in terms of culture. And we've seen teams get undone by one who multiplies to two, who multiplies to four, who multiplies to eight. Then the locker room's dead. Antonio Brown has that kind of cachet inside the locker room. And if he's going to be a bad apple, then the young receivers look at him and they say, well, he gets away with it, I can. Then you start looking at other positions, and all of a sudden you got 10 guys that think they could do the same thing. Your locker room has eroded, and it's a bad, bad look for the organization. Get rid of them. Send them packing. Get them the hell out of the building and move on with your football team.
All right, that's Pete Prisco there. JOC, again, when we talk about the Raiders situation, you talked about it being John Gruden's team. Again, that guaranteed contract, lots of money. If this doesn't work out, if this plays out, whether it's suspension, maybe multiple games, maybe he's not even on the team anymore. I'm talking about maybe worst case scenario. How much of this falls on John Gruden, what Mark Davis now views about his prized head coach?
Well, I mean, I'm him getting cut right now. I haven't heard that. I don't even want to speculate on that. I think that would be pretty extreme, and they'd set themselves up for a pretty good legal fight. They gave up a third-round pick for him. You know what I mean? And the money, we've already documented, they can come after any guarantees and potentially have them void. And it's not like they gave him $30 million up front. I think he got a $1 million signing bonus. So that's we can kind of go back to chicken or the egg. Like, well, why did they get him when they got him for how, potentially a lot of money. But in terms of present-day value, not a ton up front and only a third-round pick. Because of all the off-field stuff and the aggravation and the drama and the tantrums and wanting special treatment and all that. So, it would cost them a third-round pick. They traded a third-round pick the year before that for Martavis Bryant. They got absolutely nothing for him, and everybody in the league knew he's probably going to be suspended anyway. So, in the grand scheme of things, do I think it would be something that sets back the rebuild exponentially? No. He's over the age of 30. He's not a guy who's going to be there 4 or 5 years down the road anyway. Again, it's going to be a daily and weekly calculation for John Gruden. What am I getting out of him? What can I get out of him? And what am I dealing with?
All right, we still have Pete Prisco on the phone. One more. No Pete Prisco. All right, we're going to thank you. JLC, certainly appreciate it. Thanks for the insight and the latest there with Antonio Brown. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, Jamie Eisenberg will join Chris Hassel and myself to talk about Antonio Brown. What about Josh Jacobs, Derek Carr, Tyrell Williams, and Darren Waller? A fantasy perspective now that Antonio Brown could be facing a suspension from the team.